Have you ever had that strange feeling that the universe was conspiring in your favor? A book falling open exactly to the page you needed to read. A casual encounter that completely changes the course of your life. Or that phone call that comes at the exact moment you were thinking about the person. What could this be? Mere coincidence or something deeper? Carl Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, a meaningful connection between events that apparently have no causal relationship. What if I told you that these coincidences are actually signs that you're on the right path? What if what you seek so intensely is also, in some mysterious way, seeking you? Prepare yourself for a fascinating journey behind the scenes of your own existence, where the visible and invisible intertwine in a cosmic dance that can completely transform your perception of reality. In a world dominated by cause and effect, by logical explanations and scientific reasoning, there exists a phenomenon that continues to mystify even the most rational minds. When Carl Jung coined the term synchronicity in the 1920s, he was attempting to name something that exists in the blind spot of conventional Western thought, a meaningful coincidence that cannot be explained by causality alone. But what exactly did Jung mean by synchronicity? Far from the watered-down concept of meaningful coincidences that has permeated popular culture, Jung was describing something far more profound, a principle that stands alongside causality as a way of understanding how events connect in our universe. For Jung, synchronicity represented an acausal connecting principle, a phenomenon where events are linked not by cause and effect, but by meaning and significance. Consider this. You're thinking deeply about a childhood friend you haven't seen in decades. No external trigger prompted this memory. It simply arose in your consciousness. Then later that same day, you receive an email from that very person. The conventional mind would dismiss this as mere chance, a statistical inevitability in a world of billions of daily interactions. But Jung proposed something more revolutionary, that there exists a connection between your inner psychic state and external reality that transcends conventional understanding of how the world works. Jung developed this concept through decades of clinical observation and his own personal experiences. Working closely with quantum physicist Wolfgang Pauli, Jung began to see parallels between the mysterious world of quantum mechanics, where particles appear to influence each other instantaneously across vast distances, and his observations of seemingly connected events in the psychological realm. This collaboration between psychology and physics suggested something profound, that perhaps the division between the physical world and the psychological world is not as absolute as we might think. The essence of synchronicity lies in meaning rather than frequency. A true synchronicity isn't just unusual, it carries personal significance that resonates deeply with your current life situation or psychological state. This is a crucial distinction that Jung emphasized repeatedly. The clock, striking at precisely 11:11, isn't synchronistic unless that number holds particular meaning for you, or connects to something significant in your life journey. Jung's concept directly challenged the materialistic worldview that had dominated Western thought since the Enlightenment. In a materialist perspective, the universe operates like a complex machine, with each event causing the next in an unbroken chain of causality. Synchronicity suggested something radically different, that meaning and significance could also organize events, that the psyche and the physical world were not separate domains, but interconnected aspects of a greater whole. This perspective wasn't entirely new. Eastern philosophical traditions, particularly Taoism, had long embraced the notion of meaningful coincidence as revealing the underlying unity of all things. The I Ching, an ancient Chinese divination system that fascinated Jung, operates on precisely this principle, that the moment of questioning contains within it the pattern of its answer. Jung saw synchronicity as a Western psychological framework for understanding what Eastern wisdom had recognized for millennia. What makes Jung's concept so revolutionary is that it doesn't reject causality, but complements it. Just as light can be understood as both a particle and a wave, depending on how it's observed, reality can be understood through both causal connections and meaningful coincidences. This dual perspective offers a more complete understanding of our experience. The implications of synchronicity extend far beyond interesting coincidences. If our inner psychological state can somehow correlate with external events without any causal mechanism, then the boundary between self and world becomes permeable. Our consciousness may not be merely an observer of reality, but a participant in its unfolding. This perspective has profound implications for how we understand ourselves and our place in the cosmos. Critics, of course, dismiss synchronicity as selective perception, confirmation bias, or the mind's tendency to create patterns where none exist. And indeed, the human brain is a pattern recognition machine par excellence, sometimes finding faces in clouds or messages in random noise. Yet, Jung was well aware of these psychological tendencies and still maintained that something more was at work in truly synchronistic events, a meaningful connection that reveals deeper patterns in the fabric of reality. For Jung, synchronicities often appeared at critical junctures in a person's psychological development, during major life transitions, spiritual crises, or periods of intense transformation. They seem to function as guideposts, confirmations that one was on the right path despite the uncertainty that accompanies any significant change. In this way, synchronicities serve as bridges between our conscious intentions and the deeper currents of the unconscious, suggesting that perhaps what we consciously seek is also being sought by forces beyond our awareness. This brings us to one of the most profound implications of Jung's synchronicity concept, that consciousness itself may be more fundamentally interwoven with the physical world than our modern scientific paradigm has assumed. Rather than being an epiphenomenon of brain chemistry, consciousness might participate in reality in ways we are only beginning to understand. The boundary between the observer and the observed, between the subjective and objective worlds, becomes less absolute and more permeable than we typically assume. To truly grasp what Jung meant by synchronicity requires a willingness to suspend our habitual ways of thinking, to entertain the possibility that our everyday logic of cause and effect captures only one dimension of a multidimensional reality. It invites us to pay attention differently, to notice connections based on meaning rather than mechanism, and to consider that perhaps the universe speaks to us not just through physical laws, but through meaningful patterns that resonate with our inner journey. What if the boundary between what exists out there in the objective world and what lives in here in your subjective experience is far more permeable than you've been led to believe? Jung's revolutionary understanding of synchronicity begins with a radical premise. Your psyche is not merely a passive observer of reality, but an active participant in its creation. This perspective challenges the fundamental assumption of modern Western thought that there exists a clear dividing line between subject and object, between the observer and the observed. Jung proposed that our inner psychological reality and the outer physical world exist in a dynamic relationship, constantly influencing and reflecting one another. He called this concept psychoid, the idea that psyche and matter are different aspects of the same underlying reality rather than entirely separate domains. When we truly grasp this concept, synchronicities begin to make sense not as violations of natural law, but as glimpses into the deeper unity that underlies our experience. The psyche, according to Jung, is far more vast than our conscious awareness. Beneath the surface of our everyday thoughts lies the personal unconscious, the repository of forgotten memories, repressed desires, and unacknowledged aspects of ourselves. But deeper still lies what Jung termed the collective unconscious, a shared psychic substrate that connects all human beings through universal patterns of experience he called archetypes. These primordial images and themes, the mother, the hero, the shadow, the self, structure our experience in ways we're rarely aware of consciously. When your conscious mind aligns with these deeper layers of the psyche, the boundary between inner and outer can momentarily dissolve, creating the conditions for synchronistic events. Your external reality begins to mirror your internal psychological process in meaningful ways that cannot be explained through conventional causality. The world becomes a mirror, reflecting back to you the contents of your deepest psyche at precisely the moment when recognition serves your psychological development. Consider how your emotional state colors your perception of the world. When you're depressed, the world appears bleak and threatening. When you're joyful, the same environment seems filled with beauty and possibility. This isn't merely subjective interpretation. Your psychological state actually filters what you notice and what you overlook, effectively co-creating your experienced reality. Synchronicity takes this phenomenon a step further, suggesting that at certain pivotal moments, the external world doesn't just appear different, but actually arranges itself in patterns that meaningfully correspond to your inner state. This doesn't mean that reality is entirely subjective, or that we magically manifest whatever we desire through positive thinking, as some New Age interpretations might suggest. Jung was far more sophisticated in his understanding. Rather, he proposed that consciousness itself operates according to principles that transcend our conventional understanding of space, time, and causality. The psyche and the physical world are not separate domains, but complementary expressions of a unified reality that includes both matter and meaning. Jung collaborated extensively with quantum physicist Wolfgang Pauli, one of the pioneers of quantum mechanics. Both men recognized striking parallels between the strange behavior of subatomic particles and the phenomenon of synchronicity. In quantum physics, particles that once interacted remain entangled, regardless of their distance apart, responding instantaneously to changes in each other's state, what Einstein famously dismissed as spooky action at a distance. Synchronicity might represent a similar entanglement between psyche and matter, between the observer and the observed. The relationship between your conscious intentions and the unconscious is particularly important for understanding how synchronicity functions. Your conscious mind sets direction and focus, but the unconscious, with its vastly greater resources and connections to the collective unconscious, arranges the synchronistic events that guide your path. This explains why synchronicities often appear when you've released conscious control after a period of intense focus. The unconscious continues working on your behalf, manifesting connections your conscious mind could never have arranged. This relationship between inner and outer realities manifests most powerfully during major life transitions or psychological transformations. When you're undergoing a significant inner change, perhaps questioning your career path, ending a long-term relationship, or searching for deeper meaning, the outer world often responds with a cascade of synchronistic events that seem to guide and confirm your new direction. These aren't random coincidences, but meaningful patterns that emerge when your conscious direction aligns with the deeper currents of your unconscious development. Jung observed that synchronicities tend to cluster around archetypal situations, birth, death, falling in love, spiritual awakening, moments when the archetypal dimension of experience becomes activated. During these times, the boundary between personal psyche and collective unconscious becomes more permeable, and the principles governing the collective unconscious, which include acausal connections, become more evident in your personal experience. The world temporarily operates according to meaning rather than mechanism, creating the meaningful coincidences that define synchronicity. How we interpret these experiences matters enormously. Those with a strictly materialist worldview will dismiss even the most striking synchronicities as mere coincidence, closing themselves off from their potential guidance. Those with a more receptive attitude, who can hold the tension between rational skepticism and openness to meaning, may discover that synchronicities offer valuable orientation during periods of uncertainty or transition. Jung advocated neither blind belief nor rigid skepticism, but rather a curious, phenomenological approach, simply noting these events and their impact without jumping to conclusions about their ultimate nature. The practical implications of this understanding are profound. If your inner psychological state influences the patterns you experience in the outer world, then psychological development becomes not just a private inner journey, but a process that can transform your entire lived reality. Working with dreams, engaging with symbolic material, integrating shadow aspects, and developing a relationship with the self, all central processes in Jungian psychology, aren't merely about feeling better, but about fundamentally shifting how you experience and participate in reality itself. This explains why Jung placed such emphasis on the individuation process, the lifelong journey towards psychological wholeness and authenticity. As you become more fully yourself, integrating previously unconscious aspects of your psyche, your relationship with reality itself transforms. Synchronicities often mark significant steps in this journey, confirming that your conscious path aligns with your deeper purpose. The world begins to meet you differently when you show up more wholly and authentically within it. Understanding synchronicity in this way challenges us to move beyond the either-or thinking that characterizes much of Western philosophy, either objective or subjective, either material or spiritual, either science or mysticism. Jung proposed a both-and perspective that honors both the material world studied by science and the meaningful patterns recognized by the psyche. Reality, in this view, is neither purely objective nor purely subjective, but emerges from the dynamic relationship between consciousness and the world it perceives and participates in. Perhaps the most revolutionary implication of Jung's understanding is that meaning is not merely something we project onto a meaningless universe, but an intrinsic aspect of reality itself, one that becomes visible through the phenomenon of synchronicity. If this is true, then the universe is not the cold, mechanical system portrayed by reductive materialism, but a living fabric of interconnected meanings in which consciousness plays an essential role. Your psyche doesn't just interpret reality. In some profound sense, it participates in its creation. In the tapestry of our daily experiences, synchronicities are woven throughout. Yet most of us walk right past these meaningful patterns without noticing them. Learning to recognize synchronicities requires developing a different kind of attention, one that's attuned not just to logical connections, but to meaningful resonances between your inner world and external events. This skill of discernment, knowing the difference between ordinary coincidences and authentic synchronicities, is essential for anyone seeking to access the guidance these experiences can provide. The first challenge in recognizing synchronicity is overcoming the skeptical mindset of our modern culture. We're taught from an early age to prize rational explanation and dismiss subjective experience as unreliable. While critical thinking is valuable, This exclusive focus on materialistic causality creates a kind of perceptual blindness to meaningful patterns that don't fit neatly into cause and effect relationships. Jung himself noted that synchronicities are often dismissed not because of the evidence against them, but because they contradict our theoretical assumptions about how reality works. So how can you begin to recognize these meaningful patterns when they appear? The essential characteristic of true synchronicity is the element of meaning. A synchronistic event carries a sense of significance that resonates with your current life situation, inner conflicts, questions, or developmental challenges. The external event seems to comment on or respond to your inner state in a way that feels personally relevant. This distinguishes synchronicity from mere coincidence. It's not just unusual, but meaningful in a way that speaks directly to you. Pay particular attention to events that provoke a strong emotional response. What Jung called numinosity, that sudden chill down your spine, the catch in your breath, or an inexplicable feeling of wonder often signals that you've encountered something that transcends ordinary experience. This emotional response is your psyche's way of highlighting an event's significance, drawing your conscious attention to a connection your deeper self has already recognized. Timing plays a crucial role in identifying synchronicities. They often appear at pivotal moments in your life, when you're facing an important decision, going through a major transition, or wrestling with a significant question. During these threshold experiences, the boundary between conscious and unconscious becomes more permeable, creating conditions where synchronistic events are more likely to emerge. Pay special attention to unusual occurrences during these transitional periods. They may carry guidance precisely when you need it most. Repetition is another important clue. When you encounter the same unusual symbol, number, name, or theme multiple times in a short period, especially in different contexts, this pattern often signals a synchronistic phenomenon. Jung noted that these repetitions often correspond to archetypal themes that are being activated in your unconscious. For instance, repeatedly encountering symbols of transformation, butterflies, snakes shedding skin, phoenixes, might appear when you're undergoing a major personal transformation, even if you haven't consciously recognized this process yet. The content of synchronicities often involves symbols that bridge the personal and collective dimensions of experience. You might dream of an unusual animal you've never seen before, only to encounter it the next day in a completely unexpected context. Or perhaps you keep noticing references to a historical figure or mythological story that somehow reflects your current life challenges. These symbolic elements often function as messengers from the unconscious, carrying information that your conscious mind needs but hasn't yet formulated directly. Learning to recognize synchronicities requires developing what Jung called active imagination, the ability to engage with symbols and patterns on their own terms without immediately reducing them to rational explanations. This means temporarily suspending your analytical mind and allowing yourself to be curious about what these events might mean. What does this pattern remind you of? What feelings does it evoke? What associations arise when you consider it? These questions can help reveal the meaning that makes a coincidence synchronistic. Keep in mind that synchronicities often appear in clusters, with one meaningful connection opening the door to others. Once you begin noticing these patterns, you may find yourself in a temporary state where synchronicities seem to multiply around you. Jung explained this phenomenon as the result of lowered psychological barriers between conscious and unconscious processes. When you acknowledge one synchronicity, you become more receptive to others that might ordinarily go unnoticed. Journaling can be an invaluable tool for tracking and understanding synchronistic events. By recording these experiences when they occur, you create a record that allows you to notice patterns over time? What themes keep appearing? What areas of your life seem most connected to synchronistic events? A synchronicity journal helps counter the tendency to forget or dismiss these experiences and provides material for deeper reflection on their potential meaning in your life journey. It's important to maintain a balanced approach between openness and discernment. Not every coincidence carries significant meaning, and the tendency to see synchronicity everywhere can lead to a kind of magical thinking that undermines the genuine value of authentic synchronistic experiences. Jung advocated for what he called critical mysticism, an approach that remains open to non-causal connections while maintaining intellectual rigor and psychological honesty. Dreams often provide an important context for understanding synchronicities as they reveal the unconscious themes currently active in your psyche. When waking events seem to mirror or respond to recent dream content, this connection strongly suggests a synchronistic pattern. Pay particular attention when elements from dreams, especially unusual or vivid ones, appear in your waking life shortly afterward. These connections between dream and waking reality were, for Jung, among the most compelling examples of synchronicity. The recognition of synchronicity is both an art and a practice that develops over time. As you become more attuned to these meaningful patterns, you may notice that they often provide exactly the information or confirmation you need at critical junctures. They function as a kind of natural guidance system, offering direction when logical analysis alone cannot provide answers. This doesn't mean abandoning rational thought. Rather, it means complementing it with an awareness of meaningful connections that transcend conventional causality. Technology and modern life can both hinder and facilitate our recognition of synchronicities. On one hand, our device-filled, distracted modern existence can make it difficult to notice subtle patterns and connections. On the other hand, our interconnected world creates new possibilities for meaningful coincidences. That email from a long-lost friend just when you were thinking about them, or finding exactly the resource you need through a seemingly random online encounter. The key is maintaining presence and awareness, regardless of the context. Perhaps most importantly, recognizing synchronicities requires a certain humility, an acknowledgement that our conscious perspective is limited and that meaning can emerge through channels we don't fully understand. When we approach life with the assumption that everything significant must be planned or controlled by our conscious will, we miss the guidance that comes through these spontaneous, meaningful patterns. Synchronicity asks us to acknowledge that perhaps we don't navigate our journey alone, that in some mysterious way, what we seek is also seeking us. By learning to recognize synchronicities in your daily life, you open yourself to a dimension of experience that most people overlook. These meaningful coincidences don't just make life more interesting. They can provide orientation during confusing times, confirm you're on the right path, or redirect your attention to aspects of experience you've been neglecting. They remind us that beneath the surface of ordinary reality lies a deeper order of meaning, one that occasionally becomes visible through these remarkable connections between inner and outer worlds. At the core of Jung's synchronicity concept lies a profound truth. The relationship between you and what you seek is reciprocal. This principle, captured in the phrase, "What you seek is also seeking you," reveals one of Jung's most remarkable insights. The archetypal pattern of the seeker exists not just within us, but in the very fabric of reality. Understanding this reciprocal relationship transforms our approach to life's deepest quests and explains why synchronicities appear most powerfully when we're engaged in meaningful searches. The seeker archetype represents a universal human pattern, our inherent drive to search for meaning, wholeness, and connection. Jung observed this pattern across cultures and individual lives: the hero's journey, the spiritual quest, the search for knowledge, the pursuit of love. This archetypal energy activates whenever we embark on any significant search, whether for authentic work, meaningful relationships, or answers to existential questions. Jung's revolutionary insight was that archetypes don't exist solely within the human psyche. They represent organizing patterns in the collective unconscious that manifest both psychologically and in external events. When the seeker archetype activates in your life, it creates a resonant field that extends beyond your individual consciousness, potentially attracting external situations, people, and events that correspond to your inner quest. This explains why, when you're genuinely searching for something significant, the universe often seems to conspire to bring it to you through unexpected channels. This principle operates most powerfully when your search aligns with your authentic path of individuation, the process of becoming your whole unique self. When people pursue goals that reflect their deeper purpose, synchronicities appear with remarkable frequency, creating bridges between inner intention and outer manifestation. It's as if the universe responds to authentic seeking with recognition. What you genuinely seek at the deepest level is, in some mysterious way, also seeking you. The paradox of this reciprocal relationship explains why forcing outcomes often proves counterproductive, while genuine seeking followed by letting go frequently yields surprising results. When you identify what you seek and commit to the search, you activate the archetypal pattern. But the finding often requires releasing rigid expectations about how your goal should manifest, creating space for the seeking you aspect to work through channels you couldn't have consciously arranged. Consider how often significant discoveries, relationships, or opportunities appear not through direct pursuit, but through seeming detours that later prove essential. These aren't just lucky breaks, but examples of the reciprocal nature of authentic seeking, the mysterious way in which what you seek participates in the process of being found. This principle explains why intention plays such a crucial role in synchronicities. When you clarify your deepest desires and questions, not just intellectually, but with emotional and spiritual engagement, you create conditions where meaningful coincidences become more likely. You're activating an archetypal pattern that exists in the collective unconscious, creating resonance between your conscious intention and unconscious processes that extend beyond your individual psyche. Jung observed that this reciprocal seeking operates most powerfully during major life transitions or periods of psychological transformation. When you're engaged in significant inner work, questioning old patterns, developing new aspects of yourself, integrating shadow elements, the external world often responds with synchronistic events that support this transformation. There's a crucial distinction between this archetypal understanding and simplistic manifestation teachings. Jung wasn't suggesting that mere wishful thinking attracts desired outcomes, but rather that genuine psychological engagement with what truly matters creates conditions where synchronistic connections become possible. The seeking must be authentic, aligned with your deeper nature and purpose, rather than driven by ego desires or social conditioning. Understanding that what you seek is also seeking you transforms seeking itself. Rather than a linear process of pursuing external goals, authentic seeking becomes a dance of intention and receptivity, of conscious direction and openness to unexpected pathways. It suggests you are not alone in your deepest quests, that the universe somehow participates in and responds to authentic seeking through the meaningful patterns we call synchronicity. Take care and see you on the other side.